In the forgotten mist of a lonely planet, a ranger condemned to obscurity stumbles upon a creature no one has ever seen. A fragile dragon whose very existence sparks events that will summon a fleet of alien warships and decide the fate of worlds. Every choice he makes could mean sanctuary or destruction, and nothing will ever be the same again. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video, and tell us in the comments where are you watching from. Now, let's jump into the story. On the quiet edge of the galaxy, Ranger Oren Caldwin walked his usual patrol through the whispering valley of Duskfall 7. The mist hung low across the ground, curling around his boots and swallowing the sound of his steps. He had walked this route countless times, his job to record moss growth, small animal tracks, and the shifting patterns of cloud cover. It was a lonely task, the kind given to someone who had been forgotten by the larger agency. For years, he had resigned himself to a life of isolation and silence. Oren had been a ranger for only a handful of years, yet his superiors already considered him unremarkable. They called his posting a chance for reflection and development. He called it exile. At 35, his uniform hung loose, the patches fraying, the color faded from too much sun and not enough care. His hair never seemed to lie flat, and his face carried the kind of forgettable look that others passed by without a second thought. But that morning, something different waited in the valley. A faint sound drifted through the mist, sharp and clear like the ringing of crystal struck by a hammer. It was not the cry of any bird he knew, nor the squeak of the small rodent creatures that scurried across Duskfall 7. It was a sound that felt alive with meaning, as if the valley itself had spoken. Oren paused. His instincts told him to mark the sound and move on. Protocol demanded it. Yet something in that sound tugged at him, like a key turning inside a lock he had never realized was there. He moved carefully through the dense brush, brushing aside ferns slick with dew. There, in the hollow of a fallen tree, lay a creature unlike anything he had ever seen. It was small, no larger than the length of his arm, and its body shimmered in the dim light. Scales covered its frame, each one shifting color from copper to bronze, as if alive with fire under the surface. Delicate wings folded tight against its back, translucent like old parchment, glowing faintly with thin veins of blue light running through them. The creature lifted its head, and its eyes met his. Those eyes burned with intelligence, golden, bright, and steady. They locked on Oren's gaze, as though measuring his worth. Oren's breath caught. Every training manual he had ever studied told him what to do. Unknown life forms must be recorded, marked with exact location, and left for a specialist team to investigate. Contact was forbidden, but as the creature's tiny claw scratched gently at the worn leather of his glove, the thought of leaving it behind felt impossible. "Hello there," Oren whispered, his voice trembling in the still air. The creature tilted its head, and with a small movement, it climbed onto his hand. Its tail coiled around his wrist, flicking with delicate rhythm, like the hand of a compass. Then it let out a soft chirp, the same bell-like sound he had heard before. Oren looked around the misty valley, searching for any sign of a nest, of larger creatures that might have left their young behind. But there was nothing. No broken branches, no prints in the soft ground, no sign of parents waiting nearby. The valley lay silent, holding only him and this small, impossible being. "Where did you come from?" he asked under his breath, though he knew no answer would come. The little creature sneezed, sending a tiny ring of smoke, rising lazily into the cool air. Oren blinked, hardly believing what he saw. Every ranger manual warned of the danger of long-term isolation. The reports called it field fatigue, sometimes ranger madness. Signs included talking to oneself or imagining things not real. But the weight of the creature in his hand was real. The warmth against his glove was real. He pulled out his old data pad, the screen flickering with age. The official wildlife database, last updated nearly a decade ago, listed no record of dragon-like species on Duskfall 7. In fact, no planet in this sector had ever reported such a creature. Dragon. The word came unbidden to his mind, whispered like an echo from ancient myths. Oren knew he should log the find and wait for orders, but orders came slowly and sometimes never at all. He thought of the years wasted in exile, the quiet loneliness that had become routine. He looked at the small creature, now curling comfortably in his, eyes half closed, as if it trusted him. For the first time in years, Oren felt needed. He closed the datapad and slipped it back into his pack. "Let's call this a rescue operation," he murmured. The creature chirped again, its wings giving a tiny stretch, as if in agreement. As Oren began the walk back toward his cabin, he felt the valley shift around him. The mist seemed heavier, the silence sharper. The strange cry still echoed in his ears. Far above, high in the gray sky, faint shapes moved briefly before vanishing into cloud. Unseen eyes were watching, but Oren did not notice. His attention was fixed on the small life, now resting in his hands. What began as another dull patrol had become the beginning of something extraordinary. And deep in the valley mist, the story of Oren Kaldwin and the dragon named Solin had already started. The first night after Oren Kaldwin carried the small dragon back to his cabin, he barely slept. The creature, whom he had decided to name Solin, seemed restless. It chirped like tiny crystal bells whenever he set it down, and only quieted when it nestled against his wrist. Oren lay awake, listening to the sound of its breathing, realizing his life had already changed in a way he could not undo. By morning, Solin had eaten half of the emergency rations Oren had been saving for years. Beetle protein, dried root fibers, and even a portion of the bread-like wafers all vanished quickly. The datapad had offered no advice, and Oren found himself reading passages from outdated manuals on reptilian species. None of it matched what he was seeing. Solin was not just surviving, it was growing. Within a single day, the dragon had nearly doubled in size. Its wings stretched wider, their thin membranes glowing when sunlight touched them. Its scales shifted shades more vividly, sometimes burning bright copper, other times soft silver. Oren could not help but watch in awe. He had seen countless animals cataloged in the agency's reports, but none compared to this. His cabin, however, was less suited to a growing dragon. By the second night, Solin had discovered flight. With wings buzzing like living parchment, it darted across the small space, colliding with shelves and sending fragile equipment tumbling. Oren tried to keep calm as glass beakers shattered and his only working lamp was knocked over. "Stop that," he muttered, raising his hand as though the dragon would listen. To his surprise, Solin hovered midair, tilting its head as if considering the command. Then, with a deliberate flick, it landed on his shoulder and chirped in a tone that felt almost playful. Oren exhaled, unsure whether to laugh or panic. Over the next 3 days, his cabin became a place of constant discovery and constant frustration. Solin preferred warmth, often igniting small sparks that left black scorch marks across the wooden walls. One evening, as Oren removed his sweater, Solin hiccuped, and the fabric caught fire in an instant. The dragon's diet grew stranger by the hour. First insects, then roots, then, to Orin's dismay, the leather of his boots and the edges of his chair. Nothing seemed safe. Each time Orin tried to take notes for a proper log, Solon interrupted by climbing across the datapad, leaving faint scorched trails across the screen. Still, amid the chaos, Orin felt something he had not experienced in years: purpose. The little dragon seemed to trust him completely. At night, it curled near his shoulder, its small body radiating a steady warmth that pushed back the cabin's chill. In the morning, it greeted him with a chirp, as though eager for the day to begin. By the third morning, Solon's behavior shifted again. It no longer chirped at nothing, but instead reacted to the outside world. It pressed its nose against the single cabin window, wings trembling, as though sensing something beyond the valley. Orin followed its gaze and frowned. The sky was not as it should have been. Above the misty horizon, faint lines of light shimmered, forming shapes too precise to be natural. They shifted slowly, arranging into patterns that reminded Orin of constellations. But these were far too regular. He blinked hard, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. The shapes remained. He tried to convince himself it was a trick of the twilight, perhaps interference from the aging communication grid. But deep down, a knot of unease formed. Inside the cabin, Solon paced restlessly, wings half open, tail twitching with energy. It emitted a low hum, not unlike the vibration of a distant engine. Orin reached out, placing a hand gently against its back. The hum stopped, but the dragon's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. That evening, Orin made a series of personal notes in his log. Subject consumed 3 times its body weight in food. Appetite uncontrolled. Fire risk identified. Day 2. Subject discovered flight. Numerous breakages. Shows signs of intelligence, possibly understanding commands. Ignores them when it chooses. Day 3. Subject exhibits unusual interference with communication systems. May be linked to electromagnetic output. Outside sky activity confirmed. Cannot explain patterns. Will not report until further confirmed. As he closed the datapad, Solon chirped again, as though agreeing with his secrecy. Orin sighed, running a hand through his wind-swept hair. He had always dreamed of studying xenobiology, real alien life, something beyond endless reports on moss and soil. Yet, now that he had it, he felt completely unprepared. The night passed slowly. Solon refused to sleep, instead fluttering around the cabin, pausing often at the window. Orin tried to rest, but dreams of black ships and glowing skies haunted him. When dawn finally began, he staggered outside to clear his mind. The mist parted just enough for him to see the valley stretch wide. And there, cutting across the horizon, were massive silhouettes. They were not stars. They were not weather anomalies. They were ships, black, angular, and vast. They moved with purpose, blotting out the weak sunlight. Dozens, then hundreds, maybe more, descending in perfect formation. Orin's heart pounded, his breath caught in his throat as he stumbled back toward the cabin. Behind him, Solon launched into the air, wings glowing like fire, a sound of excitement rising from its throat. The valley, once silent and forgotten, had become the stage for something immense. Orin stood frozen, staring at the dark shapes filling the sky. The small dragon perched on his shoulder, its golden eyes fixed on the descending fleet. For the first time, Orin understood that Solon's arrival had never been chance. The sky itself was changing, and his quiet exile was about to be shattered forever. The ground shook as the first ship descended into the valley. Orin Caldwin watched in disbelief as the massive vessel lowered with surprising grace. Its surface was made of a material that seemed to drink in the light, an obsidian black that reflected nothing, as though it was a moving shadow. The ship landed just 300 meters from his cabin, its enormous weight pressing into the soil, yet leaving not a single ripple of sound. Orin stumbled back, his hand gripping the doorframe of the cabin. He wanted to run, to hide, but his eyes were locked on the sight unfolding before him. More ships followed, hundreds of them, each settling into place with military precision. In minutes, the quiet valley was filled with towering shapes, a perfect geometric pattern etched across the land. Solon, perched on Orin's shoulder, let out a high-pitched trill of excitement. Its wings fluttered against his neck, glowing faintly as if responding to the presence of the fleet. Orin felt his chest tighten. The strange bond he had sensed with the dragon now pulsed stronger, as though Solon was at the center of everything happening. From the first ship, a seam split open. The surface parted without a sound, and a ramp extended down to the ground. 6 figures emerged, their movements sharp and mechanical. They wore armor made of the same black material as the ships, the surface shifting slightly with the light, as if alive. Their helmets were featureless, insect-like, with glowing slits where eyes should have been. They moved in formation, creating a perfect circle around a 7-figure. This one was different, taller, more imposing, its armor carved with intricate glowing lines of blue. Across its shoulders draped a heavy cloak that hung unnaturally still. Ignoring the constant valley wind, each step it took echoed faintly, carrying a weight that pressed against Orin's chest. Orin swallowed hard and remembered his training. In the bottom of a storage locker, he had a first contact kit issued by the agency years ago. With trembling hands, he opened the box. Inside was a small white flag, a universal translator, and a thin booklet titled, "So You've Met an Alien Species. Don't Panic." He raised the translator as the armored leader stopped in front of him. Clearing his throat, Orin recited the greeting he had memorized long ago. "Visitors to Duskfall 7, I am Ranger Orin Caldwin of the Interstellar Park Service. I welcome you in peace." The leader tilted its head slowly, like a predator studying prey. Then it spoke, its voice a horrible blend of grinding metal and stretched violin strings. The translator in Orin's hand struggled, words flickering across the screen, before a clear sentence emerged. R. Return the celestial air or face immediate disintegration. You have 20 seconds to comply. Orin blinked. The what? The leader raised one arm, pointing directly at Solon. The small dragon, instead of hiding, launched into the air with a chirp, circling merrily above Orin's head. Its wings left faint streaks of light as it moved, every beat of its wings sending ripples through the air. The translator hummed again, clarifying the alien's words. The celestial heir of the Draconis Dominion, sovereign of 9,000 worlds, rightful flame-bearer of the imperial throne, you have stolen our ruler. Orin's mouth went dry. He looked up at Solon, who at that very moment, you may instead face excruciating imprisonment until the collapse of your star. Orin felt his knees weaken. He remembered the misty valley, the hollow log, the small creature looking at him with trust. He had not stolen anything. He had found Solon abandoned and alone. I didn't kidnap anyone, he said quickly. I found the creature in the valley. I have been caring for it. I didn't know. The armored beings around the leader clicked and shifted, exchanging sounds that the translator failed to process. Fragments appeared on the screen, investigation, tradition, protocol. Finally, the leader spoke again. Your claim will be investigated. Until then, you will serve as caretaker under our supervision. Failure to comply will result in atomization. Orin nodded immediately. Caretaker, yes, agreed. By sunset, the fleet had fully entrenched itself. Ships aligned in a spiral formation, with Orin's small cabin at the very center. Alien officials entered the cabin, establishing what they called a provisional command station. His small table was covered with glowing devices, and his kitchen had been claimed as a briefing room. Solon, seemingly pleased, curled up in the corner, its golden eyes flickering like twin flames. The leader finally introduced itself as Grand Marshal Saltrin, commander of the Imperial Guard. Its true name was longer, a string of clicks and metallic tones that Orin could not repeat. But Saltrin allowed him the shortened version. As night fell, Orin's unease deepened. In the middle of the cabin, Solon had begun to build a cocoon. Glowing strands of energy radiated from its body, weaving a sphere of light around itself. Orin tried to touch it once, but the warmth was too strong, like standing beside a furnace. The aliens formed a ceremonial circle around the cocoon. Their chants filled the air, low and rhythmic, resonating deep in Orin's bones. He sat in the corner, gripping the useless pamphlet in his hand, watching as the creature he had rescued prepared to transform into something far greater. And with each passing moment, he realized the truth. His exile was over. His fate was now bound to the heir of a galactic empire. The night was heavy with silence as the cocoon pulsed in the middle of Orin Caldwin's cabin. Strands of golden light shimmered across its surface, rising and falling like the rhythm of a heartbeat. The aliens, armored in black and glowing with faint blue etchings, stood in a perfect circle. Their voices rose in low, resonant chants, words so old that the translator refused to render them, flashing only, "Language exceeds parameters." Orin sat on a stool in the corner, his hands gripping the thin booklet that once promised to guide him through first contact. It was now a useless weight in his lap. The cabin that once felt too large for a forgotten and the presence of something greater than he could comprehend. The Grand Marshal Zaltrin stood closest to the cocoon, its angular helmet tilted as though in reverence. When Orin asked how long the process would take, the alien answered with mechanical precision. The awakening ceremony lasts 19 cycles, approximately 16 of your hours. 16 hours. Orin rubbed his face with his hands. He thought of the moment 3 days ago when he found Solon in the valley. A fragile creature scratching at his glove. Now that small life had become the center of a galactic empire. Through the night, the cocoon shifted. Sometimes it glowed faintly, casting soft light across the room. Other times it flared so brightly that Orin had to shield his eyes. When he closed them, the afterimage still burned in his vision, a reminder of the power contained inside. He tried to rest, but his thoughts returned to the same question. What would Solon become once the cocoon broke? And more importantly, what would it decide? Zaltrin had been clear. Once the heir emerged, they would issue their first decree. Tradition dictated that the caretaker world was either granted imperial protection or destroyed as a demonstration of might. Those were the choices: protectorate or ashes. Orin stared at the cocoon, his stomach tightening. Protectorate might mean safety, but it would also mean control. His world would no longer be free. Destruction was unthinkable. Yet what power did he have to influence the outcome? Hours passed. The chants never stopped. The rhythm rose and fell like the tide, filling the cabin with a constant hum. Orin began to feel as though the sound was inside his bones, shaping his heartbeat. Then, just before dawn, the cocoon cracked. The first fracture was small, a thin line of glowing light. But soon, the surface split wider, pieces peeling away with sparks of energy. The aliens bowed thee, their voices rising louder. Orin stood, his hands trembling, his heart racing as the cocoon burst open. From the light emerged Solon, transformed. The dragon was no longer small, no longer fragile. Its wings stretched wide, each one larger than Orin's entire cabin wall. The scales shone with radiant colors, shifting from silver to gold to copper, glowing with every breath. Its eyes blazed bright amber, carrying wisdom far beyond its years. Yet when it looked at Orin, there was something familiar still. The spark of trust, the bond formed in the valley. The aliens dropped to their knees. Zoltran stepped forward, bowing low. "Sovereign, your command is awaited." Orin held his breath. This was the moment. His world's future would be decided in a single decree. Then a voice filled his mind. It was clear, warm, and unmistakably Solon's. "You cared for me when I was lost." Orin's eyes widened. "You can speak?" "Not with words," the voice continued, "but with tea. Our bond allows it. You chose compassion, not power. Now I must choose as well." Solon turned its gaze toward the Grand Marshal. The room grew still. The dragon's wings stretched wider, glowing brighter, until the entire cabin shook with light. When the voice came again, it rang with authority. "This world shall not be a protectorate. It shall not be destroyed. It shall be free. Dusk Falls 7 will be a sanctuary for all life overlooked by the Dominion. No empire will rule here. No war will scar it. Let this place be a refuge." The aliens shifted, confusion rippling through their ranks. The translator stuttered as it tried to capture the words, spitting fragments onto the screen. Unprecedented, decree confirmed, protocol broken. Zaltrin raised its head slowly. "Sovereign, such a choice is without precedent. The Empire has no protocol for this." Solon's golden eyes burned brighter. "Then let this be the first new tradition." For a long moment, silence stretched across the sea. Then, one by one, the armored soldiers bowed their heads again, acknowledging the will of their ruler. Zaltren finally lowered to one knee. "As you command." Orin let out the breath he had been holding. His knees nearly gave out, and he braced himself against the wall. Relief and disbelief rushed through him. He had expected destruction, or at best, control. Instead, Solon had chosen freedom. Outside, the fleet began to rise. The massive black ships lifted from the valley floor, their engines humming like storms contained in metal. They ascended into the sky, falling into perfect formation before vanishing into the upper atmosphere. Within minutes, the valley was empty again, save for the single cabin and the lingering light of dawn. Solon folded its wings and stepped closer to Orin. Though now towering, its gaze held the same warmth it had when it was no larger than his hand. The bond between them pulsed stronger, no longer fragile, but unshakable. "Your exile is ended." The voice whispered in his mind. "You are no longer forgotten. You are chosen." Orin nodded slowly, his heart heavy yet filled with something new. For years he had been overlooked, a ranger lost in obscurity. Now he was the caretaker of a bond that had reshaped the destiny of a world. He looked out across the valley as the mist rolled in once more. The place that once felt empty now seemed alive with meaning. The story of a forgotten ranger and the lost dragon had become something greater, an origin not just for friendship, but for hope across the stars.